Donald Trump and Elon Musk have picked their first target in their war to destroy the federal bureaucracy. Their first target is all of the foreign aid going out of the United States. So this includes all funding going towards Ukraine for their government assistance, all humanitarian funding throughout all of Africa and developing countries.
The only exemptions were military aid to Israel and to Egypt, interestingly enough.
I don't know why Egypt made the list there.
Either.
But this is going to have incredible consequences very, very quickly.
Already is starting to. Yes.
The United States gives about 40% of all international aid that is received in the entire world.
Which is crazy.
It is one of our best, basically soft power moves that we have to build rapport and relationships with a lot of these countries.
From a geopolitical angle, absolutely, but it's also just the right thing to do. Like if you want some kind of evidence to argue that we're actually a good hegemon, look here.
One of our most successful programs was PEPFAR. And PEPFAR was basically this international war on HIV/AIDS. And so we have funded and set up clinics around the world, specifically in like South Africa, Ethiopia, all these different African countries to try to stop the spread of HIV/AIDS. And we've been successfully saving about 2 to 4 million people a year right now from dying from HIV/AIDS. Once this is paused, now that it's paused, all of those millions of people are now at risk of dying.
If it stays paused, yes, that's going to be the effect.
And
what I was curious about is this pause happened a little bit more than a week ago now. So I was like, has anybody stepped in? Because that would be the hope, right, for someone who's kind of steel manning this argument, I guess, is that they're going to need to support it themselves, so they will start doing so. But everything that has come out since has been these clinics are shutting down. These people are being turned away when they go to get more help. These shelters in Ukraine that are sitting like right on the front lines of the war, they're shutting down and people need to move further back away. It's just the chaos has continued. There is nothing there to step in.
And that chaos is one of the big reasons why all of these the Trump angle of dealing with politics is fundamentally flawed. Because all of these different shocks, whether or not he comes out a week later and changes his mind, the shocks have ramifications.
Yes.
There are hundreds of people right now in Africa, thousands of people that have medical devices in them designed to prevent HIV and AIDS. These medical devices need constant screenings. One woman in South Africa was called into her clinic to have it emergency removal of this medical device because they said, we're not going to be able to guarantee that we can supervise your treatment. So we have to take it out of you right now.
Yes.
And that's happening across the world right now because the United States
is being unwound.
Yes. The United States is pulling back off of this fight. And this is a huge travesty. I mean, if we were a moral country and a good people, everyone would look at this and say, oh my God, wait a second. We prevented 26 million people dying from HIV/AIDS over the course of the last 20 years. Now we're just going to stop doing that? Whoever did that's got to go.
Yeah. We can hardly really communicate how big of a travesty this is, right? Sitting in the bedroom that we're in right now talking about this, but every story you read about this is, we're going to have to stop feeding the only moderately severe malnutrition kids because we have to only feed the severe malnutrition kids. And these moderately malnutrition kids, once they go to severe, they're going to become they're going to be stunted for their whole life. But this is all we are able to do now.
I also, and I want to put something else into perspective here. When you're like the richest country in the world like we are, we have a moral obligation to at least do something to combat these massive problems.
This is where you lose me.
This is where I lose a lot of people, unfortunately. Yeah. But we have the easy opportunity to spend, I think it's like 7 to 6 billion a year for PEPFAR. And PEPFAR has successfully stopped 2 to 4 million people dying a year from HIV/AIDS. It only takes 2 years to recreate the Holocaust, which could have been just pennies on the dollar of the U.S. Treasury.
Yeah.
When we're talking about a program that's $7 billion worth to save 2 to 4 billion lives, there is no bigger bang for your buck than that.
Yeah, well, this is, I guess, the reason you lose me is moral obligation generally is kind of going to shut me off. But to me, it's a moral desire.
Yeah.
I would want this. And I feel like most people, when they learn about the visceral stories of people suffering that are happening because this is getting shut down, would also say, oh no, I want this to continue. Especially once they also realized how tiny a sliver of our federal spending this is. It's
so
less than
small.
1% of our budget. And that's why, like, what we have to get to is what the real strategy is from the Trump administration.
Yes.
Is just to have PR wins to show that they're cutting from the budget.
And it's also not in the Trump's interest to tell you about PEPFAR. They don't want you to know about PEPFAR
No.
because then you might get upset by it.
No.
What they want to do is they want to focus in on Serbian gay classes or like pottery classes in Peru. And they pick out these little things that cost like $900,000, $800,000, $1.5 million. They pick out these tiny, tiny things.
Yeah.
And then they throw the baby out with the bathwater, because what they're doing is they're saying, okay, no more funding for any of this stupid BS. But you know what, guys? If you went to Congress and you might have made the case, Congress might agree with you. There's plenty of Democrats that are going to be like, okay, you know what? That actually is a waste of money. And I would be one of those Democrats.
Yes.
I'd be like, okay, you know what? Actually, yes, I do agree with you. Cross that one off. Cross that one off. But they're not doing that. No. They're lying to you. They're taking away everything.
Yes. But I think like I don't know. We have to look at how that is strategic as well. Like they're trying to reset the baseline. They want the baseline to be, and this is literally the point. It's like we're pausing for 90 days to reevaluate, and then we will see. So they want to set the baseline at no spending, and we'll see what we're going to add to that, rather than the baseline being all this spending, we'll see what we're going to take away from it. The problem obviously is because the 90-day pause, if that is even true, because we have evidence where Marco Rubio put out a waiver so that the aid for food for areas with a bunch of starving people the food would be allowed to get through, but that food hasn't kept coming because there's too much confusion and bureaucracy and unknowns about what is allowed and what isn't to make it happen.
I want to push back, not push back, but you said because of the bureaucracy. It's actually the opposite. It's because of the gutting of the bureaucracy. The infrastructure is gone now. Mm-hmm. That's the issue. And it's really hard to build stuff up, but it's really easy to tear it down.
Yeah.
And so he's saying we're going to tear it all down in the first 90 days, mm-hmm. and then we'll build back up what we want to build up later. But that takes time. The USAID program started in the 1960s under JFK. It was originally designed from a congressional statute that tasked the president with creating a program to deal with international poverty. Then JFK creates the agency through executive order. In the 90s, Congress then says that this USAID agency exists by statute. Congress now makes it, and they separate it from the State Department. They make it two separate entities because they don't want USAID to be totally tied to the whims of the president. They see that as a conflict of interest. Well, now what Trump has done is he made Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, the head of USAID, completely cutting off the discretionary boundary basically designed by Congress to keep the president's hands off of this type of thing. Mm-hmm. And this is just another example of President Trump throwing and pissing and shitting on the Constitution like he wants to do his entire life. And now he's finally getting to.
Yes.
And I think that this is the grander story. So we've talked about the practical impacts mm-hmm. of this. Then we have to talk about the constitutional crisis aspect of this.
Yeah.
This is something that was created by Congress. Congress says by law this thing has to exist. What do we even have a Congress for if the president can just say, nah, I know you want it, and you might have voted for it, and you might have been elected by the people, but I'm not going to listen to you.
Well, the problem, too, is that the courts have already blocked this freeze on foreign aid disbursements.
Yes.
So, like, we are in... I mean, this is what our biggest fears
explain
were.
that to the audience again. What do you mean the courts have blocked? What did you mean by that?
So someone sued, basically, and said, no, you can't stop this foreign aid from going out because it's been allocated. It's money that's been allocated by Congress. You have to spend it the way that we said you were going to spend it. But that hasn't stopped them. So this is where we're in like really scary territory, which is what we were fearing the most after Trump won the election. That is, if at the end of the day, Trump can do things whether or not Congress has given him the power to, because he is the leader of the executive branch, the one that actually executes things. Mm-hmm. The court system, the judicial system, is supposed to be the check on his power, to say if he goes too far and does something that Congress didn't enable him to do, the court says, no, you can't do that, and then he stops. But the problem is the court has no executive or enforcement power of their own.
The court has no military of its own.
So when it comes down to it, there is no one to stop Donald Trump from doing what he wants as long as his bureaucracy is beholden to him, which is what he's spent the last 4 years since he got out of office preparing everyone around him to be.
Yeah, and he told us. I mean, on the campaign trail, he told us exactly what this was going to be. He didn't really mince many words. He basically said this is what he's going to do, and now he's doing it.
Yep.
And I think the Trump administration is using that as ammunition, saying that this is what the American people voted for.
Yep.
But we all know that's not how elections work. We all know that thousands, millions of people walked into the voting booth and voted for egg prices. They didn't vote to get 4 million people their HIV treatment taken away.
Oh,
they
yeah.
didn't vote for that.
But that also doesn't matter. And to me, that is an indictment of the voter.
Yeah, of course. It's partially an indictment of the voter. I mean, does it matter? I mean, not from the angle of how this current moment is going to play out.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant to that. Does it matter in the historical sense of, how democracies die? Yes, then it's very relevant.
Yeah.
Because people aren't focusing on what's actually relevant,
Yes.
unfortunately. And I think
Yes.
that this USAID thing is only the first line of many, many more attacks to come, and we're going to be talking about that in more episodes later in the week.